Hello, my name is Keyack, and in this video today, I'm going to showcase how to create a shape or item in Tekla Structures by combining two individual parts that are modeled in Tekla Structures into one. And so the end result is going to be basically what we see here on the right-hand side of the screen, where when I select on this, this is actually a shape or item in the properties. If I come up here to the shape or item profile selection, that will open up the shape catalog. We can see that I've got these two parts here, but you can also see a variety of different other examples, including nuts, washers, eye bolts, hillside washers, basically just standard geometries or bought out item geometries that are not going to change in length or anything like that. They're a fixed geometry, and I just want to call them a very specific profile or catalog number and then use those throughout the job. Now, when we actually look at the progression of this, you'll see here that I've actually got two separate parts modeled on the left. So I have a contour plate for the stiffener, and then I have a poly beam plate here for the bent plate. And I've actually welded those together. That is truly how this is going to be fabricated in the shop. And then I even added holes here for the bolts. And this is representative of an actual assembly that represents this. And if I come down here to the sketch from the client, you'll see that that's exactly what is happening. I have it welded together in these two separate parts. But in the bill of material and the reports, they want this to be considered one standard part called PC-031. They don't want this to be considered separate parts. Now, I could have made a standard assembly here, but I want to keep this simple for users so that way they don't have to deal with sub-assemblies in their bill of materials and in the model. And they really don't need any sub-material parts here. They just want this to be considered a part and PC-031. And I'm going to use the shape item in Tekla to do that. Now, the reason why I have three separate pieces here is to show you the progression. Here on the left, I have the two parts. Then here in the middle, I actually used the add to material command by coming up here to the edit menu at the top left of Tekla, and I went to added material, and I actually attached this stiffener plate as a contour plate to the bent plate. So that way when I click on it, it shows this as being fused together and as one continuous part or plate. Then over here on the right, I actually converted that fused geometry into a item, which is the end result that we're looking for. And so the difference here is that when I click on this unified part, you'll see that the profile is still there for the bent plate, for the poly beam, but I actually want this profile to be called PC-031. And so when I turn this into an item, I can actually control that name and turn it exactly into that. Now, let's go ahead and show you how I did this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this over. So I'll just copy this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delete out the welds because we don't need those welds there, and I will leave the holes. They are going to disappear when I turn it into a shape, but I want you to see that and what's going on with that. So we'll leave them there for the moment. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the bent plate, and I want to call this basically the name of this plate the profile or the name of the shape or item that I want to create in the end. So I'm going to actually call this PC-031. That's the end result that I want to call this. And then I also want to force the piece mark here. So if I don't have a standard parts model and I want this to be a standard part or even a standard loose assembly, I can come in here and I can force the piece mark here. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I can do PC and then dash, and then if I even wanted to, I could put the leading 0 on that, but I'm just going to go ahead and show it exactly like this because this is pretty common with what this client does. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say modify here, and now I've got my numbering forced for that part, and then I've also got the name set for this, and that name here is going to be the name of the resultant shape in the end. Okay, so the next step is that I'm going to go to the Edit tab here at the top. I'm going to go to Added Material, and I'm going to say Attach to Part. When I choose the Attach to Part option, basically Tekla should be prompting me here at the lower left-hand corner to pick the part that I'm going to attach to, and then it prompts me to pick the part that I'm attaching or that I'm merging or fusing together. When I'm all done with that, you'll see that it says once you're done selecting the parts, confirm that selection by pressing the middle mouse button. So the first part I picked was the piece I'm attaching to, which is the bent plate. Then I picked the contour plate, and now I'm going to press the middle mouse button. Now I'm going to go ahead and right click and say interrupt, and when I click on this, you'll see that it is now fused together. Here before, I had two separate parts, but now I have one single individual part that's been created here. Now before I actually modify this, just to show the progression, I'm going to copy this over. So I'll just copy this, and basically I'm going to kind of represent how this is going to turn into the shape or item here. And so when I click on this, this is an individual part, but it still has this profile over here, and that's not exactly what I want. So I'm going to select on this copy that I've made, and because I've already got a PC31 shape, I'm actually going to turn this into an A, just so that way I can differentiate the original shape item that I have in the catalog versus this new one that I'm creating as an example. So I'll just say modify here. And now what I'm going to do is if I select on this, I will be able to right click, and then there's this option here at the bottom of the right click for creating shape from geometry or convert part to item. They are essentially doing the same thing, except the one difference is that create shape from geometry, that's actually going to create the shape geometry in the shape catalog, but it will leave this original part here. So it kind of like keeps the original parts that I'm sort of creating the shape geometry from. The convert part to item will actually create the shape in the catalog, and it's going to also delete out the two separate parts here and turn that and insert that actual shape geometry in the model as an item. We're going to do that in this case here just to combine those two steps. So I will choose this option here, and it's just warning me that, hey, any user-defined attributes and things that I've set on the part, like if I set the bought out item UDA or any other user-defined attributes, are going to be wiped out. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes to that. And then what will happen is you'll see that the holes or the bolts have been wiped out on that. And then also now, instead of it being two separate parts fused together using the add to material command, now I have a shape. And up here in the upper right hand corner, you will see that the shape name is basically the grid intersections or near the grid and the elevation that it's on. And then it has the 31A. Now, one unfortunate thing here is that I want to get rid of all that grid labeling. And I'm not exactly sure why Tekla does this, but there is unfortunately no way to rename the shape item directly in Tekla Structures, at least not in version 2022 where I'm at here. So I can't right click and rename or anything like that, but I do see that that shape item has been added to my catalog. Now, you might ask me, hey, well, why don't I just go over here to catalogs underneath the Tekla menu and go to shape catalog? And isn't there an ability to modify that in here? And there is not a way to modify it. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to change that name real quick. I'm going to go ahead and go to the open model folder. And inside of there, there's going to be my shape geometries. So if I just go into shapes and shape geometries, we're going to see that a new file has been created in there. And the one that allows me to actually edit the description of the profile is this XML file that is underneath this shapes folder in my model folder. Now I'm looking for the most recent date modified, especially if I have other shapes that I've already created. So here it's today's date. I'm going to just double click on this, and I have Visual Studio to actually edit this. But if you needed to edit this yourself, you can always right click and say edit or open with and choose like Notepad, and you should be able to edit that if you don't have like an XML editing software on your computer. It'll open it up, it'll show this XML text in here, and at the very top what we want to change is we want to get rid of all that grid labeling at the prefix here under the name. So I'm going to take that out, and now you see PC-031A. And that's the resultant shape name that I actually want for my shape in Tekla. So I'm going to save the file, I'll close it down, and then we'll go back here into Tekla Structures. Now what I need to do is I need to actually reopen my model. So I'll just open recent, and I'll just go open up that model again. We'll save our model here. And the reason why we're reopening the model is because we need that shape geometry and that new shape name to be reloaded, and that happens upon opening the model. Okay, so once the model reopens, I come down here, and you're going to see that essentially this is called not only the name, but actually the shape is renamed here to PC-031A. So now I've got a lot of the basic steps here for what I want with my shape. Now to actually insert this in, when I click on it, you'll notice that on this particular shape that the two insertion points here are actually shown as vertical. Whereas really when I put this in the model, I want it to be horizontal. But the reason why the shape geometry insertion points and the coordinate system of that shape geometry that Tekla created is vertical is because I created the first part on this clip as a polybeam. And when you do a polybeam, you have to pick 3 points. Well, the first 2 points on a polybeam are actually the local coordinate system of that part. And I picked from the top, then to the heel at the corner, and then at the other toe of the leg of that bent plate. And these first 2 points are what I picked, and that's why the shape geometry is vertical. So that's something important for you to know. If you use any modeling objects in Tekla to then convert into a shape, the first item of your part that you attached to, so I attached the stiffener to the polybeam, so that was kind of like the driving part of my attached or fused material. Whatever the coordinate system is of that part, like the input points, that's going to drive the coordinate system of your shape geometry when you convert it to an item, just like I did here. Now, it's not a super big deal. I don't know of any way to change it, but I'm actually going to be able to work around that here in a second. But I did want to explain how did these 2 points get picked by Tekla to put the shape in. Now watch this. If I come up here to the steel menu, let me show you how you insert this. If I go to item, and then I basically go over here to the right hand corner and I choose the shape that I just created. So I'll scroll down and I'll find my PC-031A and I'll say OK. You'll see that when I actually put this in, if I tried to put it in horizontally, like how I would do this as a detailer, you'll see that it comes in incorrectly. And it's expecting me to actually pick 2 vertical points to place this. However, I can still come in here and I can modify the shape properties and geometry as needed, and I can change the rotation to be positioned exactly how I want, and that's how I've got this resultant here. Now I'm going to take this one step further and I'm going to actually wrap this up into a custom component part, so that way when I model this in, I can actually model it horizontal or flat, which will be closer to what the detailer is expecting and wanting. The other thing too is that when you convert things as shape or items, the holes that you modeled in as bolts in Tekla, they don't come across. So I can put holes and bolts in here just like in any normal part, but they don't get carried across in the shape or item. If you actually wanted penetrations or to see those holes stored in the shape itself, then you'd actually have to do those as polygon cuts or part cuts in the actual parts. So that way those holes or those penetrations are going to show up. But I actually want bolts here, and there's good reason for that when I actually apply this in the model. So I'm going to go ahead and say copy from this other part here, and I'm just going to copy from this corner, and then I will copy those holes over to this other piece. And now I actually have the holes that I want and that I'm going to use and turn into bolts here in a little bit. I have this called the piece mark that I want. I have forced the piece mark here so that way it bills out that way in the bill of material. And the last step is I'm ready to wrap this up as a custom component. Now to turn this into a custom component part, I'm going to select on this part and then I'm going to hold down Control and select on the individual bolt groups here. So that way I have a total of 4 objects selected that are going to be part of this custom component part. I'm then going to come over here to my Applications and Components panel on the right hand side of the screen, and you'll see that I've actually already created some examples here to work with. Now I'm going to go up here to this 3-bar button at the upper right hand corner and say Define Custom Component. Now inside of this wizard there are 4 component types, and in this particular case we're going to create this as a custom component part. So I'm going to choose this here, and then I'm going to actually just label this as the PC-031A, just because I've already got a PC31 created in my model and in my catalog, and I'm just creating another example to show this. And the next thing is that I always want this to be positioned exactly how it's oriented, and I want the part to always be inserted at the bottom of the clip because of how I'm going to apply this in the model. So I don't really need any positional controls of like rotating this around or anything like that. And so I want to uncheck this Use the Center bounding box for its positioning. When you uncheck this, that means that the parts are always going to be positioned exactly where you pick the 2 points to insert them. So here I've got everything set. I will then press Next. The 4 objects I've got here, the bolt group and the part itself or the shape or item, those are the things that are going to be created by the components. The part positions are basically the 2 points that I want to pick to put this in the model. And so I'm going to pick the back end corner of the bent plate clip. Then I'll pick the midpoint here, so that way this is going to be horizontal. And then now I will press the Finish button. And when I do that, you'll see that if I have objects and components selected here at the bottom, that I'm still clicking the individual objects. But if I change this to Select Component, you're going to see that it is now a custom component part and called PC-031. Now if I go back to my Applications Components, that then just got created here inside of my ungrouped items in the catalog. And I could right click and say add that into my tools or my favorites or whatever it is that I'd like to do. And of course I could change the thumbnail and stuff as well. But the key here is that I just wrap this up as a custom component so that way I can insert this horizontally rather than dealing with that vertical insertion point problem that I was showing you a little bit ago. So what do I mean by that? Now, if I click on this component and I pick 2 points, you'll see here that it exactly inserts based on the orientation of my 2 points. Well, let's see that I want to do a little bit of a slope here. So I'm going to just go up. You'll see that that actually slopes as well. So not only does it horizontally follow where I pick, it'll actually follow wherever I pick to position that. So let me do that one more time. I'll just pick here and I'll say Control left click and then click up, and there you go. And that's actually the application of what I'm going to be doing with this. I'm going to have this on a sloped rafter or roof beam, and this clip needs to basically follow that roof slope as it changes. So there you go. I wanted you to see that the progression of how we turn this from 2 individual parts that were welded together. We fused this together using the attach to material option. So you do need to do this first, where you have to fuse the 2 pieces together as one. And then once you fuse those together, you can right click and convert to shape geometry, as well as create the part item after creating the shape geometry, which are these 2 commands at the bottom. That gave us this resultant part. We copied the holes over to this so we can use this later, and then we wrapped it up as a custom component, so that way we didn't have to deal with the individual vertical positioning points to put this in the model. All right, so before I actually show the application of this in detailing, what I want you to see is how do I get these shapes over into my firm folder. So if you want to reuse these shape geometries that you have in the catalog, you can either export them, or you can just quickly take the shape geometries from your firm or from your model folder, which is here on the left. And then what I had to do is over in my firm folder, I created a profile folder inside of there. Inside of that profile folder, there is the shape geometries and shapes. Don't copy the shape geometries and shapes folder directly in your firm. You must have this profile folder first. So you have that, and then what I did is I just actually found the shape that I wanted to copy, which is the latest date. You'll copy that file, and then you'll also copy, so from the shape geometries, and you'll also find your shapes file. You'll copy these 2 into each of these respective folders that match in your firm folder, and now you can use that shape going forward on any of your projects. Okay, so now I'm going to actually show this in application. This is actually for a metal building, and I imported this in from MBS, and the connection didn't quite come across the way I wanted. So I'm going to use the actual original clip that comes from the software as a picking point to put my new component in there. So I'll come in here to my elevation view, I will pick the corner, and you'll see that this is sloping, and so I'm just picking these 2 points along the bottom to get my clip in there that I want. Now, when I come back and I just select on that plate that MBS brought in, I'll delete that out. It deletes those bolts, and then I just need to wipe out these holes here that came across, and I can delete that out. And now what I'm ready to do is change my selection to select components here at the bottom of Tekla. So the Christmas tree icons here at the bottom. I'm going to select this component because I don't want this to be a custom part anymore. I actually want this to be a loose piece of material here in the model with the bolts. So I'll right click on that and I'll choose the explode component option. That now separates this into separate objects here. Now what I'm going to do is you'll see that I actually separated the bolt groups on purpose now for this, so that way because I have 2 different eave strut purlins that I'm actually going to be working with here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first double click on this, and I will turn this bolt solid on so that way the bolt's in there, but you'll see that I want that to actually bolt through that eave strut purlin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to say bolt parts, and then I can pick on the eave, and then I will pick on my part and middle mouse button, and now it bolts all the way through there. So I'll just repeat that process, right click, and then say bolt to parts, pick that one, then the clip, middle mouse button, and then I also need to just select that and turn on the bolt here. I also need to turn washers off in this particular condition, so I'll just fix that. Let's just turn that off, modify, and then there we go. Now we've got that done, and I would finish up by doing the same thing here. So I'll just say bolt parts. I will then click on my plate and then say my clip, middle mouse button, and then what we'll do is we'll see that the holes are there. I'll just choose the bolt option, turn washers off, modify, and there we go. Now from here, I could then choose to wrap this up as a custom component, so that way I could apply that in the other scenarios in the model. And this would then be a connection. So to do that, what I would do is I would select on my part, my bolt, then my other 2 bolt groups here. I can then go to the applications and components panel. I can then come in and say define custom component. I'll make this a connection, and I'll just make this eave connection for a quick name as an example, but you'll name that whatever would make sense for you. And then I'm just going to go ahead and leave everything as auto for now. And then I'll just say next. Component objects are going to be created, which is the plate and the bolts. The main part, let's go ahead and make that the plate. Then we'll say next. Secondary is going to be the first purlin, and then the second purlin here, or eave. I'll hold down Control on my keyboard so that we can select 2 secondaries, and then I will finish. And now I have my cone in, and that will also appear here inside of my list. So if I do a search for that eave component, let's see, what did I actually call this? I called it eave connection. So eave connection, and there it is. And so now I can actually just use that rather than doing those extra steps. I'll just come in here, delete these 4 holes out, delete that plate, and now I can apply my component. And then I'll pick my 2 purlins or my eaves here, middle mouse button, and there we go. We now have that connection applied, and we can use that for other similar columns and rafters that have exactly the same plate sizes and the same eave purlin sizes that I'm using, but I can rapidly apply that to the rest of the conditions in the job.